talk about three different buildings, and as outlined here. So I don't know if any of you were able to get to the campus prior to the conference or not. We're pretty proud of it. The central part of the campus is the main tower, which you see in the center of this slide. But the two other buildings we're going to talk about are the Hogg Memorial Auditorium, which is kind of towards the back in this slide, and Battle Hall, which is arguably our most historically significant building on campus. And what we're going to go through is all the challenges that we have, which many of you share in terms of restorations and rehabilitations of these historic buildings. And each of these has kind of come at it from a different angle. And we say the good, the bad, and the next. And Dan's going to take you through and talk a little bit about what some of those lessons learned, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're projecting forward with the main tower project. Just to put our campus in context, the university was founded in 1883. The campus itself has always existed on what was traditionally known as the 40 acres. That 40 acres is now about 438 acres. But we still refer to it as the 40 acres. And the buildings we're talking about today actually reside on that historic core that is defined as the 40 acres. The buildings we'll be talking about, Battle Hall was completed in 1908, 1909, sometime in that time period. Cass Gilbert was the architect for that building. And the two other buildings we'll be talking about were completed in the 1930s under the leadership of Paul Cray. Just as a note, Cass Gilbert was the first university architect for the University of Texas. Paul Cray was the third university architect, who's probably the most noted because of the impact he had. Over 30 buildings on campus had his hand on it, and most people ascribe the overall campus plan to his vision in the early 1930s. So with that, we'll jump into it and look at some of the challenges that we've faced on these projects and how different approaches have yielded different results, and how we're kind of learning as well, how do you take different resources, different approaches to projects in order to get some of these historic buildings back online and functioning in the way that we want them to. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dan Cook, who is the Executive Director of Planning, Design, and Construction at UT.
Thanks, Brent, and thank you guys for sticking around. I see some folks have already had to leave to catch their flight, but we were hoping that this topic would be interesting because I'm sure, show of hands, everybody who's got historic buildings on their campus, right? Everybody, right? And so it's definitely a challenge. They're places that we love, places that are special, and kind of on the one slide are all of the kind of like maybe soft things about historic buildings, and then on the left side are the realities and the challenges of what we have to deal with to actually make them work. Brent talked about Cass Gilbert and what he did. This was a sketch that he put together where you could see the makings of the campus starting to take shape, where there was an idea that there would be one main central building in the front that would kind of be the main administrative building, and then you see flanking off to the side Battle Hall, which was the first university library. It follows the precedent of a lot of famous libraries that you may have seen in France or Boston or other places, and so it's got a beautiful central reading room. It's a relatively simple building, but we'll compare that to a different version of a library as the university advanced. And what you see here in the center is the main building, which also served the dual purpose of being the main library and the central administration buildings. As Brent talked about, Paul Cray, he was really prolific, and most of the buildings that you see on that square were built in some shape or form similar to, if not just the basic footprint of the building. Many of them were actually designed by Paul Cray as the consulting architect to include the first real auditorium and theater space, which was the Hogg Memorial Auditorium. And so they're all relatively still intact, and we'll talk about the first one, which is the Hogg Memorial Auditorium, which is a beautiful little building. And the scope of this was to basically, a lot of these first two projects that we'll talk about started as basically a response to deferred maintenance. And our deferred maintenance program in general was really founded around some key building components, in particular the envelope. And so we had a lot of projects that were aimed at repairing the roof, keeping the buildings watertight, protecting it from the outside. But then associated with that is the mechanical systems that go with them as well. So if you were a bad roof and if you were a bad HVAC system, you would score well in our deferred maintenance program. And so the first two projects I'll talk about kind of scored out really well. They were important buildings. Their roofs were terrible, their HVAC was terrible, their electrical was terrible. And so the commitment was able to be made by the university to invest in these. For this project, it was conceived as one project, just over $27 million, but was basically a full gut and redo on the inside. There was some interior wall configuration changes that you see there in the lobby. The ornate wood wall basically houses a bank of restrooms behind it where there was really no place for people to go to the bathroom, and there certainly wasn't the right quantity or distribution of stalls to accommodate that as well. The building was dirty, the lights didn't work, the HVAC didn't work. And I'll show you, really some before and after, and you can see over on the left-hand side, you can see the electrical space, which was just pretty old, small room, and it really got turned into a fairly large space in the basement. We had to do a significant amount of excavation, build a tunnel to get all of the equipment in, and the outside was cleaned. You can really see it was a fairly dramatic before and after with the limestone and some of the biologic growth that was in the limestone that needed to get cleaned away. And then interior, it was all new seats, redoing the roof, carpet, putting some ADA in, redoing the pit for the theater, I want to draw a blank, the orchestra pit. But that was all part of the scope as well too. So pretty significant amount of work in the building. Just some good things that came out of that. It's a beautiful building. It just reopened. We just had the ribbon cutting about a week and a half ago, and it's really, by all measures, an excellent space. We hosted the Secretary of State. We've hosted a famous local musician. We've had several different events in there already, and there's a lot of enthusiasm around building this. So it's really a case of and it's probably going to be LEED Platinum certified. So it's one of those, hey, good job, guys. And these were some of the things that helped it go well that were a challenge. One was getting a good team on board. You may have noticed on the first slide that it was a construction manager at risk, and the local firm we hired was Spa Glass, and they just have a great attitude. One of the challenges obviously was the electrical, and as you can see there, you couldn't even access the room because it was so dangerous to go into the room because of the fear of arc flash or other bad things happening. And we had a 1931 set of plans to go off of, but one of the ways that we were able to get past that was for the general contractor to bring in some of the specialty subs early on in the project to do some of that exploratory work so that they could really get a better sense of the scope for that project and what was involved for the electrical, and really identifying the critical path being dependent upon the lead time for the switchgear, something that you guys have all probably identified as well too, but then being able to have a procurement plan where we could do multiple GMPs to start buying some of those long lead time items early, so that we could eventually stay on schedule at the end. We also went through, it's kind of interesting when you read the story of how did we get the building to look so good and clean. There were 5 different options that were used, all involving different high pressures of water and cleaning solutions and scrubbing techniques and so on and so forth. And then somebody on our staff, said, hey, why don't you try this product D2? If you can Google it and get it, at Walmart.com. And it was by far and away the easiest and most effective cleaning solution that we could find, and it's really produced amazing results. So I think sometimes I was having mock-ups, doing trial and error, and listening to staff, not being dismissive of some people's ideas really helped us on that one. And it's just an affirmation of good communication and talent on your team. Also, everybody plans with contingency, but how you use that contingency and how you coordinate to make sure we actually did come in slightly under budget on this project with some money left at the end. So it wasn't like we used it all up, but it was important that we did have a plan for running into some things we didn't expect. The next building, as Brent alluded to, Battle Hall, one of the most significant buildings that we have on campus, designed by Cass Gilbert, who is really famous in his own right. And this is a really exquisite building. A lot of the details that you see there revealed through the colors in the soffit were not visible. It was extremely faded. and it basically looked kind of like two colors. There was a really poorly done chain link fence type of structure underneath the soffit to try to prevent things from falling. I mean, the building looked like it was really in disrepair. So you're seeing the after pictures here of the exterior. And again, this is the one that was, could we do it better? Yes. And this is the one of, full disclosure, we'll talk about things that look great on the outside, but not so great on the inside. And so again, I talked about the roofs, the HVAC, the electrical, and this project was conceived as 3 different projects that had all of those scopes in different places. And so what you're seeing here is the exterior and roof project, which went very well. It was well scoped, good budget, good architects, good choices, selection of colors, and is winning an award today, a Preservation Merit Award from the local group that our staff will be going to get their plaque today. Unfortunately, though, and again, this shows you the eave work. There's a before, during, and after picture that shows you how poorly faded it was, and then up close and personal, you get a sense of the scale to be standing on that scaffolding and seeing how large that soffit is. But really well done. Didn't want to talk about the color of the door, and this was kind of one of those things. You see there the kind of copper, patina colored green door, that was previously blue, like a shade of blue that did not match the original architecture. But when we were restoring it, we're like, hey, we got to change the color of the door. And we thought this was going to be a big, controversy, because it's a famous place for students to get their pictures taken after they graduate. Everybody would want to get their pictures taken in front of the blue doors. And we were afraid, when people realize they're not blue, there's going to be an outrage because this tradition is being lost. And turns out it was a non-event. People still came and got their pictures taken like they never noticed. So sometimes the things you worry about, you don't really need to worry about, I guess.
It would have been troublesome had it been a red door.
Yeah,
originally we would have run into problems.
The shade is not that far off, or an orange door.
Nor a major competitor.
If it was an orange door, it would have been really bad. Yeah. We talked through that, and then this is kind of meant to show you sort of the outside looks great, but the inside doesn't look really good. And so kind of the sad version of this story is that while we were replacing the mechanical and fire protection systems on the inside, we ran into more than we had anticipated lead paint, asbestos, which was on the stair treads going up through this grand central staircase, and so lead got tracked through the whole building, and EHS came and shut the place down, and there was a ton of cloth-covered wire that was an electrical code violation, far more than we expected. So now we're actually in the process of conceiving a 4th project where we've got to put it all back together. And it's a really disappointing project for us, because this central reading room that you see when it was under construction back in the 30s is really a breathtaking space. And the School of Architecture, this is like a hallmark space in the program. And so architecture students love, that reading room. And there's going to be a whole class of architects that never got to use it. And so that's one of those that it just kind of makes us feel like we've got to get this better. And so as we look to the future, we're trying to capture some of these good and bad lessons learned to do it on probably what will be a much more high-profile project.
Thanks, Dan. So the main building, I'm sure if any of you have been on campus or familiar with the University of Texas at Austin, the main tower is kind of the icon. It is probably one of the most iconic buildings associated with any university in the country, or at least all of us at Texas like to think that. The building was completed in 1937. It was actually built in 2 phases to replace the old main. So it's a peculiar building. You can kind of look at the plan a little bit. You'll see that looking over here, the east portion that faces north was completed first, and then the U-shaped portion was completed later, and this had to do with some different funding that originally had been planned. They didn't think they would be able to build it all at once, but then they managed to secure the funding quick little sidebar story. It happened, it was WPA funding via the New Deal, and our local representative was Lyndon Johnson, who knew something about securing government funding. So there's a kind of a good little local Texas story there. The tower then was subsequently built on the north side, and again, the design of Paul Cray. Designed as a library, the tower itself is a large book stack structure. It is, if you go inside the tower, it is just a web of miscellaneous metals, just all the way up to the 27th floor. The observation deck is technically on the 29th floor, with the clock tower just sitting up above there. So the building was complete in 1937, has had basically no work done to it on the exterior. There's been interior modifications over time, but nothing of a comprehensive nature. There's been some spot renovations, new air handlers have been introduced, different upgrades as the building has gone through its life, and been transformed for different uses. There's been a push as the university gets close to its 150th anniversary to recognize this and restore it as an icon. If you do visit campus, you'll see that the exterior is in pretty rough shape, has a lot of rust on the windows. The masonry is in very good order, but is clearly in need of some enhanced support. There's also, though, a bigger idea at play here, and I think this is taking advantage of not just thinking about restoration, but revitalization and reimagination. As an icon of the university, the question has been posed by our Board of Regents, as well as on-campus partners, alumni, potential donors, people who are part of the UT community. What does it mean if this is an iconic element? How do we restore it so that it's meaningful for the next generation, the next 150 years? So that idea of not just kind of restoring it to what it looked like in 1937, but also how do we make it more accessible? Part of that has to do with the fact that over time the interior spaces have been taken over by administration. They were once beautiful reading rooms. Many of those have been carved up into different spaces. So how do we reinvigorate the interior as well? And here we are looking at it comprehensively. The challenge is it's a huge building. It's 350,000 square feet. And it's an important building. It's not one we can take offline for 5 years. So we're currently in the very early stages, really trying to figure out the scope. What do we do with the tower? It's designed for book stacks. It literally can't be used for anything else. There's a single means of egress for the tower, and the building is divided up in 4-foot, the floors are divided up into 4-foot increments. So we're working with our team. We're working with Robert A.M. Stern out of New York on visioning like different ways to really revitalize the tower as an active center of campus. People think of it as something you see, but people don't think of it as something that you go into. These are some photographs of what currently exists. The observation deck has a bird cage, which is there for protection, mostly present jumpers, actually, unfortunately. But you can start to see the condition of, in particular, if you look at the lower photos, you see that the stone is pretty dirty, a lot of biologics. You can see the spandrel panels there and the impact of some of the rusting, which is taking away from some of the iconic elements that are embossed on those spandrel panels. And then the interiors are just in disrepair. You see a couple of the shots from the inside up at the observation deck. Those are all spaces that we're looking at and making it a more inviting experience to come into the tower, visit the tower, go up, see the observation deck, which has been closed basically, except for off and on for the last 15 years. I think it was really the late 90s they closed it off, and it's available on a kind of spotty basis for people to tour. The other piece, though, about this renovation that is important is that we are considering this not just as a building renovation, but as the landscape and grounds around the building. So I talked earlier that these were all on the 40 acres that was part of that original plan by Paul Cray and Hare, the landscape firm. I think many of you may be familiar, famous landscape firm from the mid-20th century based in Kansas City, who had done the landscape plan in conjunction with Paul Cray. And part of this is not just as we restore a building, but also how do we restore a landscape? again, some of these areas have just fallen, they haven't been repaired, they haven't been updated, they don't reflect how modern students inhabit a campus. There is probably no conception that, you know, we would be staging hip hop concerts out on the main mall. I don't think Paul Cray had that, you know, in mind when we were programming it. Different exercises that happen on the West Mall. This area we call the North Mall, which has become kind of a service loading area for the building. Again, all these areas of the grounds that have impacted actually how the building itself is used. So we're really trying to think of this comprehensively as this anchor that's right in the middle of campus with the grounds around it as this symbol of the university. How do we think about a renovation that's not just kind of, well, we're fixing up the building, but transforming that so that we are truly revitalizing the center of campus. And we're excited just to kind of call back then to Battle Hall, which is located right here, and then the Hogg Memorial Auditorium is right there. Both of those projects become important pieces of this overall view. And I think that the real takeaway for us is understanding that when you have the option, even if it's not funded right away, but to always be thinking about these as really comprehensive, and how does that impact go outside of, you know, replacing the roof, replacing the electrical system, but how do these all tie together? And to be prepared when you go into project to make sure that you have that comprehensive plan, particularly with these older historic buildings where I don't think we ever have the luxury of just kind of drilling into one particular area, because as we all know, every time you start to pull something apart, something else is going to start to unravel. So I think having that plan in place, and I think if you can tie it to a larger ambition for the campus, it can help. And I think people start to see the value above and beyond just fixing up this building. So I think with that, we will, well, we can talk about these considerations, and I think I just covered a lot of these, but Dan, did you want to weigh in on those before we jump into questions?
No, I mean, but it is very high visibility, high profile. There's kind of a hyperlink there that shows you, like, the university's got hype videos, you know, about this to try to raise, you know, development dollars to help support it. And so, you know, all eyes are watching, and we're trying to organize our project team right now with, you know, dedicated resources that are, you know, we hired very specifically talented people for this. Brent's organizing an executive committee. And so governance and, you know, just sort of the challenges of doing this in an active part of campus where we have a lot of things going on, like, you know, simple questions like, how are we going to do the scaffolding? How are we going to do the laydown and actual construction and movement of materials and people and then through the site, become very, very hard problems to solve.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody knows, but so the tower has very specific rules about how it's lit. There's different ways it's lit to honor different things. We'll light, you'll see here, if we win a national championship, the number 1 goes up in the windows. All of that's done manually. So things like when the scaffold goes up, people say, well, what, you know.
How are we going to light the tower?
Yeah.
Through the scaffolding.
Yeah, somebody said, what if we win the national championship in football when the scaffolding's up? And I said, well, then probably the scaffolding will stay up as a good luck charm for the next 50 years, right? I don't think it's going to be up to the scaffolding, I think. But anyway.
They wouldn't do that for volleyball.
No.
So just have time for questions here. So
I'd love to field questions.
Do you get any help to do the site logistics work, or do you do that all internally, like maybe have a constructor or a firm that helps you with project implementation planning?
we could, and we have. On this one, we're really leaning heavily on the firms that we chose to do the work. You know, Ramsa Architects has done this before. Spaglass has done this before, so that we think we've hired, with the designer and the builder, really 2 talented teams to help us with that. And then internally, we're leveraging our own resources and consultants that will be brought on board as necessary to help. I don't know if that answered the question, but you're talking about like a third party potentially to come in and help with that?
Yeah, it's been my experience that architects are not well tuned in to doing site logistics and all of the internal machinations that have to occur for a large scale
yes.
renovation like this.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why we like this CMAR, you know, way of delivering the project, is that, you know, we're still doing schematic design, and we have the builder under contract right now. So they're providing pre-designed services that we're going to use to help inform all of those conversations. Any other questions?
Thinking about the stacks, the purpose of the building served as a library and the low height of the stacks and floor-to-floor elevation, and how do you get the mass of people within it in terms of bringing programs in there that are going to draw people to use this building?
So that's a big challenge. The question basically saying, what do you do with that tower? And we've actually been talking, there's kind of a philosophical debate underway, which has to do with cost, which is to really make the tower usable, we'd probably have to replace the entire structure, get a second means of egress, better elevator service, if we were going to work the entire thing. Right now, predominantly the tower is only used for storage. There's nothing in there. It's just storage. And so, but the opposite discussion is, well, the spaces that really matter are in the main building, down below that. The reading rooms, the areas that students can access, they're flexible. And so we've been kind of jokingly referring to it as the Washington Monument problem, or question, right? Which is this really akin to something like the Washington Monument, where it is this incredible symbol of the University of Texas? The importance of being inside it is less so than the importance of having it be visible and anchoring the center of the campus with activities kind of at that lower level and the ability to go up at the observation deck. But really, it's not about being able to be in the middle of the tower. So part of what we're doing right now in the early studies is to understand structurally what would be involved and the cost if we were to remove all the interior structure of the tower and rebuild it from the inside with higher floor-to-floor heights, proper egress, stair access, and so forth. And we're kind of going through that process. And I think the challenge will be, we're all aware, we're like, that would be expensive. So what's the cost benefit then, right? Like what would go in there, aside from the facilities department, which I would advocate for. But, any other questions?
But that's very much on the mind of the administration, which is to, you know, kind of as we talk about revitalize, they really don't want it to be a place where it's just admin. They want there to be some aspect of student life. And so some of those functions that we've already put on the first floor, places where they can go to, like, obviously pay their bills, get their classes, you know, have some registrar integration. But we are going to have to look at some of these other, what would bring students in, you know, to the building to make it more of a place where students feel welcome, as opposed to a place where people in, you know, kind of suits and ties go to do their work. So
one of the things that's been exciting about this project, we have a historic preservationist on staff, and she's been going through all the letters between Paul Cray and actually William Battle, that Battle Hall is named after, who is the chair of the Faculty Building Advisory Board and was really the design driver behind the main tower. And some of the frustrations between the architect and Battle made us feel good about they're as old as time. At one point, Paul Cray is complaining. He's like, "Well, I guess the regents know how to design a building better than I do." And I was like, "A tale as old as time." And the other piece is the administrative aspect, which is originally Cray didn't want any admin in the building, and the administration was like, "That's a pretty nice building. I think we should have some offices in there." And gradually, even from before it was finished, they started kind of taking over. So some things haven't changed.
yeah, they all want the president's office. We got 30 seconds.
Do check out the video, the website, by the way. Just go to
link,
Tower.
It is pretty nice. If you're looking for a slick way to advertise your capital projects, that is it. Yeah.
They scraped and tested it. Yep, they took samples, kind of went through the different layers, and then sent it off to a lab. And I think everybody was really surprised how much brighter and pastel-y they were, which, you know, just very vibrant.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much.